switched rooms between me and the video the other rooms. So I'm in this room, so hopefully they're telling people to go in this room. That's fine, I'll just get on with it.
Thanks very much. I'm David Joyce from ThoughtWorks in Australia. I'm currently here in South Africa for a few weeks, and so I'm fleeing between the two countries. It certainly is a pleasure to be here, and thanks for spending a bit of time with me this afternoon. Just to tell you a little bit about me, prior to becoming a consultant, I was a leader in organisations for about 15 years or so in the UK. But today what I do is something that's very different. And when I meet people, they say to me, David, what is it that you do? And the way that I phrase it is I work on the abnormality of normal people. That sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? What I've learned is that if you take a group of perfectly normal human beings and put them in a building and call it an organisation, they do some really abnormal things. So I'm going to talk about some of that today in this session, which is called Learning to See and Learning to Lead. So the purpose of this session is to discuss the conventional management paradigm for designing and managing work, and then look at an alternative paradigm. And as this is a presentation, all I can do when I'm up here is convey a bit of theory to you. And the bad news about anyone that goes to any conferences, you can't learn through theory. You can only learn through actually applying this, whether you choose to do so in your own organisation. So during this during this presentation, I'm also going to play a couple of videos as well, so you don't have to listen to me waffling on for 30 minutes, but also you might find them quite useful to refer to afterwards. And if you see anything that you want to talk to in more detail, then I'll be hanging around to talk about later. So is that okay with everybody? Jolly good, because that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So that's cool. Okay, so first up I want to talk about the prevailing style of management that's used in organisations today. And I see this a number across all organisations that I go to, regardless of what size they are, regardless of what industry they're in, regardless of whether they're private or public, and regardless of whether they're small or whether they're startups, or whether there's some multinational company that's been around for a long time. So typically when you go into any organisation that's being managed in a conventional way, what you find is they know lots and lots about the following. They can tell me, well, here's the number of calls that we get typically into our call centre, or here's the number of emails that we get, or here's the amount of foot traffic that we get into our retail stores. And these days they can tell me what channels customers contact us through. Is it online, is it through web chat, is it in the store, or is it in the contact centre? They can tell me about their service levels and their productivity levels and their customer satisfaction scores, and these days a lot of organisations are using the Net Promoter Score. If it's a support area, they can say this is how much is dealt with at level 1, this is how much is dealt with at level 2, and this is dealt with the people that wear sandals that live in the basement, the real specialists at level 3. They can tell me the number of appointments that they make with customers and the number of times they visit them, and also not only the number of customers but segments of customers, so dual income new kids or retirees or those kind of people. They can tell me how long people spend on their websites, what they click on, what they do, and all these kind of good things. And finally, they can tell me how well they're performing against their service level agreements. So what we find is in conventional organisations, we know lots and lots about that blue world. And what we tend to do then in IT is industrialise their creation so we can report on all those measures. Now this is really important. If I tell you you've got an organisation or you work in an organisation that's run by these numbers, I can guarantee that you have an organisation that is stuffed full of waste. Okay? I can also tell you that you're systematically making it hard to improve. Because the problem is, from a customer's point of view, none of these measures are helpful. These are all organisational centred measures as opposed to customer value measures. So typically what we know little about is, why do customers come to our organisations in the first place? We haven't got a clue from their point of view. We also know nothing about value or failure demand. Has anyone heard of failure demand before? Failure demand is our failure to do something or do something right for a customer, which causes them to then contact the organisation. So as an example, we're working in a bank in Australia. They get 2 million calls per month. So what they did is they outsourced that to a cheaper country to take those calls, and also hid the phone number on the website to drive people to use online instead of calling the call centre. But what we found is 70% of that demand was perfectly preventable. We could have switched it off because it was our failure to do something or do something right for the customer. We actually know very little about what happens to customers as they bounce around an organisation trying to get some stuff done. We know about a particular transaction, so where they were and how long they were there for, but what happens to them end to end before they got something done. Very rarely do we understand what actually matters to customers. In other words, what's the problem that they're trying to solve from their point of view? How do they want it? Where do they want it? And when do they want it? We typically don't know that. And because we know very little about what matters to customers, consequently we know very little about the actual value that we've created back for them. And finally, we have little idea if we've actually solved the problem from their point of view. We may have met our SLA or closed it off in our systems, but has it been met from the customer's point of view? So typically when we go to organisations, you see a massive contrast there between the stuff that's on the left, what we know lots about, and the stuff that's on the right, typically what we know little about from a customer's point of view. Now what's interesting is, if we want to be customer-centric, how can we be without that right-hand column? Now most organisations these days have a customer centricity strategy, and yet they don't have any of those measures on the right hand side there. So next, let's look at how do conventional organisations provide service to customers. Well, I'll ask a really dumb question first of all. Why is service important? Well, over the last few years this question spawned a lot of research, and organisations are now waking up to the fact that firms are dying at an alarming rate. They go from market dominancy to bankruptcy very quickly. And we know big names, don't we? Nokia, HMV, Blockbuster, Kodak, really big names that had great brands that have now failed. And customers will no longer remain with an organisation purely out of loyalty if their needs are not being met. So here's an example of what these studies are telling us. This is from Accenture. They went out and surveyed thousands of customers, and they found that 64% of consumers switched their business away from at least one of their service providers. Why did they do that? Because of poor customer service. Now these are very big numbers. And we know about poor service really fast these days, don't we? It's no longer a case of me just telling my friends and family. I can get on the internet, or I can go on Twitter, or on Hello Peter, or Whirlpool, or Facebook, and moan about a company. And what that means is then people find out about poor service really, really fast. And these comments don't have a half-life either. So as was reported in the Times newspaper, if in a search result, let's say you search for the name of the company in Google, and there's a negative result but directly below the name of the company, 70% of people will click on the negative result first. Oh, why is it bad? I need to go and find that out. And those comments don't disappear. So to combat this, key companies now are creating dedicated social media teams that run 24 hours a day, and they monitor Twitter and Facebook and Whirlpool. And customers have learned, rather than sit in a queue in a call centre to get something done, just tweet a complaint and you get an immediate response. And this is why service is front of mind for most CEOs today, in terms of, that's why they're using things like Net Promoter Score. That's why they're in vogue. Net Promoter Score is, how likely are you to recommend us to your friends and family? But what do you do when you get such a survey? Do you rate this transaction or all transactions you've had with the company? Are you rating the whole company, or are you rating the person? The person may have been really nice to you on the phone and empathised and used your name, but they couldn't solve your problem. And what happens to people if they get a bad rating? So how do organisations typically service customers? Well, typically we have customers, hopefully. They place demands on our organisation. That tends to go through a number of process flows that then leads to some kind of outcome. And then what we do as organisations, we standardise all of that to achieve efficiencies and economies of scale. which works very well in manufacturing. Let's say I'm building a car, there's only so many makes and models and accessories of cars, but in service organisations, what matters to me as a customer varies enormously. But in conventional organisations, what we do is we design a one-size-fits-all organisation, where we want customers to fit in with what we offer and how we offer it. However, the customer shapes, in other words, the problems that we've got in the head that we want solved, varies enormously. So I'll give you a few examples. Let's say I come over here and I want to take a mobile phone out. I'm offered plan A, plan B or plan C, and I say, oh, can I have a bit of A and B? No, it's plan A, plan B or plan C. Well, let's say I want cable TV, and I say, can I have that channel, and that channel? And I'm told, no, David, it's this package, or this package. Or the worst one is, let's say my washing machine breaks down, and they say to me on the call centre, we can get someone out to you either AM or PM. And I say, yeah, but I pick the kids up at school at 3 o'clock, so can you come after 3:30? Did you not listen to me, Mr. Joyce? It's AM or PM. Do you see what I mean? It's sort of one size fits all. So what if you have the problem in your head that you want solved and it doesn't meet that one size fits all? We have a mismatch, don't we? So unfortunately this doesn't work very well, yet we do all of this in our organisations to try and reduce costs. But the problem is, as soon as you have one person that moves away from your one size fits all, the costs are going to go up. And sadly, this is when we get involved in IT. We try and build IT on top of these broken work designs. But what that will do is that will just lock those broken work designs in and make them harder to change. So this is really, really important. This is not a code quality problem. This is not a limiting work in progress problem. This is not a scaling Agile problem. Because if we put Agile or Kanban on top of that broken work design, we risk just building the wrong thing faster. So how do conventional leaders motivate people? Well, a common method is to use targets. I see them in every organisation that I go into. And there's a conventional organisations, they think that targets are necessary, useful and helpful. They're necessary because how would you run an organisation otherwise? They're useful because it helps motivate people, doesn't it? Give them a goal, or ideally a stretch goal. And it's helpful because we can weed out those poor performers and we can reward the really good performers. But there's a problem with targets, although they're widely used, so I'm going to play my first video.
We know they make performance worse. I know that you hear others telling you that they don't like targets too. You can spot them because they say things like, there are too many targets, and there are problems with these targets. However, the difference is, can they tell you why? And when they tell you that they're going to remove targets, can they tell you why this is the right thing to do? Or are they just as likely to make the same mistakes again? So why don't targets work? Well, targets motivate people, don't they? This is true, but not in the way you think. Targets motivate people to cheat or do anything to look like they're achieving a target. Obviously, that can mean cutting corners to get there, which is probably not a good idea if you're providing a service to someone. All of this focus on meeting what is essentially the wrong objective distorts the system of work and makes performance worse. There are some targets that might work. These are usually personal goals. All we're saying is that arbitrary measures imposed from above don't work. If you want to run that marathon, then you should still go for it. You'll probably do it. Why else don't they work? Well, targets aren't usually based on any real knowledge of the actual work, just an arbitrary focus on a particular outcome. They don't give any attention to how or why the work is being done, so they don't actually reveal anything. And if they don't reveal anything, how can they be used to improve a service? The answer is, of course, they can't. Let's look at an example. There was once a healthcare organisation that centralised its branch operations to achieve economies of scale. Don't get us started on that one. The managers had imposed productivity-based targets based on how long it took to settle a case. This all sounds fine, until you find out that the time it took to settle was between 15 and 50 days, with the average at a stable 32 days. Adding targets to this won't help. What needs to happen is to find out where the variation comes from. What causes the changes in performance? Well, one of the problems was that workers were measured on how much work they did. Every action on a case resulted in points being awarded, whether it had a bearing on the purpose of settling the claim or not. So, filing a covering letter becomes a point-scoring business. All of the agents were being productive and scoring points, but this is not the same thing as settling claims, which is what the organisation was meant to be doing. So what's the alternative? It's not performance indicators or any other target that's not really a target, because as Shakespeare nearly said, a target by any other name still focuses on the wrong things. No, the real alternative is to learn about the actual work being done. We don't believe in coercing people to work more. We believe in learning about and changing the conditions so people can work better.
So I'm not sure if Shakespeare really said that, but I think you get the point. So in addition to targets, there's lots of other extrinsic forms of motivation used in organisations today. And yet, despite the evidence, and despite the popularity of videos on YouTube, such as Dan Pink's Autonomy, Mastery and Purpose, extrinsic motivation is the order of the day. So how do conventional leaders do change and improvement in their organisations? Well, typically all leaders want to improve their organisations. They want to be best, they want to be better than their competitors, and they want to be excellent. So let's look at another short video on the typical mechanisms used to try and improve organisations.
Suppose you take a bunch of people who work in organisations, put them in a room and ask them, what do you think excellence looks like? Would you be surprised if they said things like, well, being customer driven, with great processes, inspiring leadership, and succeeding through amazing people? Well, of course you wouldn't. All nice words. But as Deming would say, the question is, by what method? Behind any method is theory. Our ideas about why good is good. We may, for example, believe inspiring leadership means being good at setting direction, being a good communicator, being a good listener, or being charismatic, or being all of these things. We may believe that having great processes means compliance with ISO 9000, or having process leaders. We may believe that being customer-driven means employing devices like Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction surveys, and so on. The point is a simple one. If we ask people what good looks like, we'll get answers that tell us more about how they think and how they've been socialised, taught about management, rather than what actually works. It's worse, in fact, than that. The bunch who spend their time defining good will run the risk of believing themselves. If they all think ISO 9000 is essential for good processes, there'll be no one saying, well, hold on a minute, is that really true? To quote Deming again, experience is often mistakenly believed to be the same as knowledge. So our bunch of people sitting in a room thinking about what excellence looks like will think about it from their current point of view. It can only be thus, and their conclusions will, in Deming's terms, be a representation of the prevailing style of management.
Controversial, eh? But yet, planning and devising change in a room, every organisation I go to, that's what we do. Or these days we tend to run workshops. So we may use a variety of agile and kinetic techniques and lots of post-it notes on the wall, but the underpinning logic that's brought to bear when people enter the room remains unchanged. And the problem is, Peter Drucker mentioned this many, many years ago, creativity cannot be born in rooms. Some problems can't even be conceived of in a room. Remember we talked about the blue versus the black before, we looked at measures. What about change and improvement? Well, typically changes, we've got to start a plan. So we have a project plan. And the second is we predefine the impact, so we have an as-is and a to-be. And then we build the answer, and then we use IT to scale that answer. We then roll that answer out across the solution, across the organisation, and then think, oh, it hasn't quite worked, so we start again a plan. When we get a problem, the first thing we normally do is take it away from work and put it in a room for people to assume solutions. Typically, change is not about engaging the people on the front line who deal with customers every day and their leaders to understand the what and why of current performance. And then by getting true knowledge about current performance, that then gives those leaders clarity on where and how to improve performance. Typically, change is not about experimenting together with methods actually in the work to improve the way that the work works. Incrementally learning how to deliver perfectly what matters to customers and viewing change as emergent. And what emerges when companies do this is not just a more profound results and a better design, but a completely different organisation design because it keeps on improving because it's adaptive. And by doing so, these organisations achieve results they would never have dreamed of making up and putting in a business case. And typically from an IT point of view, it's rare that you get people in IT working with the people in the work together to first understand the what and why of performance, secondly then improving that performance, and thirdly then pulling IT to make it even better. And finally, change is typically not about rolling people into a new work design rather than rolling out the solution to the whole company. With those in the work working under the principle, doing the work and improving the work is the work, which is exactly what they do in Toyota. So using the conventional approach, so much money is wasted on change initiatives which ironically lead to little change. So as Bain recently reported, 70 to 90% of change initiatives in organisations fail. So imagine how much money that we waste. So I believe it's vitally important that we base change on knowledge. A change not based on knowledge from a customer's point of view can lead to very costly mistakes. And this isn't about intention. Everyone would say that they're trying to improve their organisations, but the problem is people have been let down by bad methods about how to sustainably improve performance. And what we see is the same lack of results being achieved again and again because we're using the same methods over and over again. This is why 70 to 90% of change initiatives fail. So I believe we're at a crossroads where we want to improve our organisations, yet we bring the same logic to bear that created the problem in the first place. And it was Einstein who famously said we can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them, so we need a different type of thinking. So this is where the Vanguard method comes in, which is I've been using over the last 7 years with various leaders in various different organisations around the world. So sorry to disappoint you, but I'm only going to touch on this very briefly because it's not a theory thing, it's a learn by doing thing. But if you look at the research around people in human systems that work in organisations, there's only 3 ways to change an organisation. The first is we can coerce people. In other words, it's best described as threatening sanctions. Okay? So this obliges compliance because people will get the reward or they'll avoid the punishment. And this absolutely does change behaviour, but only insofar as getting the reward or avoiding that punishment. It will not change the way people think. The second approach, which a lot of organisations use, is rational, where I implore to someone's good sense. So this could be a training course, send everyone on a training course, or send them a book or an article to read, or run a report, or what I'm doing to you now, which is a presentation. The problem is that rational approaches tend to polarise people. If what I'm saying up to you here this afternoon you don't agree with, no matter how many words come out of my mouth, it will not change the way you think. For effective and sustainable change, a change in thinking is required, and change in thinking is best achieved normatively, and it's best described through changing thinking through action by testing your own beliefs in work itself, and normative is the key difference with the Vanguard method. So what is this thing, the Vanguard method? Well, it's 2 key things, it's perspective and its method. And when I talk about perspective, it's helped every organisation to look at themselves from a particular point of view, as a system, as a whole. And that particular point of view is outside in, from a customer's point of view. And the system includes everything that's critical in an organisation to be understand and deliver something to a customer. So the lens we take is one of being a customer, experiencing it as a customer would experience it, and also viewing it as a customer would view it. And this means that we ignore all functional boundaries. Customers don't see functional boundaries, and it may mean we ignore organisational boundaries too, as it's the customer who is the arbiter of what constitutes your system. So over the last 30 years, Vanguard have developed methods to help people to reconceive work outside in as a system from a customer's point of view, so that's perspective. Now, the way in which the method helps you to do this is to start from the assumption that says if leaders in an organisation have designed an organisation a certain way, they've done that because it makes sense to them. But if the way they've designed it is not good and it's not helpful from a customer's point of view, what we need is methods to help them to be able to see that for themselves so they can reconceive that work. And that part is called intervention theory. So system thinking and intervention theory. And once we see our organisation with a new perspective, what we need is we need to understand a fundamental relationship that operates in all organisations. Now, every organisation I walk into, they want to improve performance, and for me that boils down to 4 things. I want to improve service, efficiency, revenue and morale. In other words, the service I give to customers, the efficiency of whether I give that service, the revenue that I generate as a consequence, and the morale of my people in the organisation. So step one in the alternative approach is, let's go and see how performance currently works from a customer's point of view. Now what's critical in understanding performance is how it's first and foremost conditioned by the system. And when I talk about the system, I don't mean the IT systems, I mean the way in which we design and manage work. And in any organisation, it is the way that it is because of how we think, and predominantly it's how leaders in an organisation think about three things: the work, those that do the work, and the way the work should be done. And because of how we think about those three things, leads us to design a system, and then that system then leads to a certain level of performance. So if we want sustainable change, we've got to work up there in the management thinking space. So therefore, what we need to recognise is one of the key things that needs to change if we sustainably want to improve performance is to change thinking. So let's have a look at our last video.
People's behaviour is a product of their system. We design our organisations as functional hierarchies, and we give each function its own targets and budget. Work, the things we do to serve customers, goes across functions. Why should we be surprised when we find that people do not cooperate? They're only doing what the system demands of them, making their own numbers. We give salespeople targets. Why should we be surprised when we find salespeople cheating, not cooperating with each other, stitching up and/or stealing customers and moving on? People in conventional call centres describe their places of work as living hell because managers monitor their activity for every minute of the day. Their low morale is a product of working in such a system. These systems earn the sobriquet sweatshop because that is exactly what they are. Ignoring this simple truth, the folks in HR tell us we need to do more teamwork, or we need to do people programs or retention programs to solve the problems. It is to treat the symptoms but not their causes. When you redesign a system, focusing on purpose rather than function, putting people in control of the work, and changing management's role to work on the system, not the people, the shift in morale is palpable and incredible. Staff turnover and sickness go down, cooperation improves, motivation is intrinsic. If you take a conventional manager to such a place, he or she will imagine something has been done to the people. But nothing happened to the people. It is the system that changed. People's behaviour is a product of their system.
Okay, so the place to start with is to go off and get knowledge. Now when people view this presentation, it actually offends many people's worldview, which is the very thing that needs to change. The point being, rather than going out to study in their own organisation, they just take an invalidated view of the presentation. But if you find leaders that are willing to go out into the work, to study the work and then change that based on knowledge, you can get amazing results in very fast time. So I just want to finish off with a couple of examples. So this is one of the largest banks in the UK. It's the largest mortgage lender in the UK. They improved their mortgage capability from 10% to 95% in 2 months. They increased customer retention by 1/3 within 6 months. And they built a new mortgage operations software application that was conceived, designed, tested and deployed in 6 weeks, when previously the fastest they'd ever done anything in IT was 18 months. Imagine the economics of this. Next is one of the largest insurance companies in the world, the largest in the UK. Remember this idea of failure demand, our failure to do something or do something right for customers? They brought that down from 70% to 18%. They saved $4.5 million and brought all their outsourced operations back onshore in the UK, but still saved money. Their IT department was 300% quicker from hello, I've got an idea, right through to when it's deployed, with over a 50% reduction in waste. Net Promoter Score from -5 to +36, and staff morale up to 85%. And these are very big numbers, aren't they? Okay, but this time they're big numbers in terms of success, rather than 70–90% of failure. So the last thing, this is a shameless plug, if you'd like to learn more about how we design and manage organisations, which by the way, everything we do was conceived in the industrial age, I wrote a free ebook that's called Theories of Work, which is available at theoriesofwork.com, so it tells you where targets and standards and all this kind of stuff comes from. If you want to learn more about the Vanguard method and look at those videos, there's many other videos on the website, vanguard-method.com, or if you want to read a book, for those of you that still read out there, there's a good book called Freedom from Command and Control, which is a good book to read if you want to look at that. So Theories of Work and the vanguard-method.com. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions? Yes.
It kind of seems like you're describing something out of the God who said that we're all saved. Sorry, I'm not sure here. But it sounds like you're describing a company like which Recorders in the book Simco kind of describes, where it changes the way management moves boundaries, make people responsible for the areas, change the way they chat to customers. Is that almost where you're leading people? The companies, changing in that way.
Yeah, I mean, Semco is a good example. They didn't use the Vanguard method, but a good example of doing something different. What brought me into this field is that I want something that's repeatable. Many, many books have been written by Semco, read by many, many leaders, who then go back into their organisations and do the complete opposite. Same with Peter Drucker, Deming, anyone you can name, Gary Hammond more recently. You know, they read the books, but they lack method. And there's people in organisations who say, I think there's something wrong with the status quo, but I don't quite know how to change it. And that's what brought me into this field. So, very good question.
If I just mentioned that, it almost seems as well it's top management that needs to change as well. It's not only, you can bring in a method, but from what I can see, the management needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the whole organisation needs to change, top to bottom, but bottom-up change is always going to hit a wall in terms of just meet your numbers, absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, good stuff. Thank you very much, everybody.